So on Saturday, we talked about happiness, contentment, and I wanted this is a follow-up to that. It was actually a two-parter, and I want to talk this morning about what I'm calling the paradox of pursuing happiness. And just a real quick review for those of you that weren't here on Saturday, because we got sort of bogged down a little bit in language, which can always be tricky. But we talked about joy and happiness, real experiences. We talked about contentment, and with joy and happiness, we typically think of them as pleasant experiences, a really important part of our this rich tapestry of life, but things that we don't want to cling to too tightly. And I'm going to get into that in more detail shortly. But when something delightful happens, we feel a lift, we feel a brightness, and that's important. It's really one of life's great experiences. But by their nature, at least joy and happiness, as we talked about them, are transient. They come and go. And I contrasted this on Saturday with a more enduring state, which we're calling contentment. The Buddha talked about his first insight into impermanence, anicca, was that includes the fact that pleasant experiences arise and pass away. They don't stick around necessarily. And when we cling to them, when we insist that they stay, we create this subtle but persistent underlying suffering, sometimes not too subtle. So forgive this jargon for a moment, but psychology talks about this a lot, certainly has talked about it a lot in the 21st century. And there you find a distinction between what's called hedonic well-being, which is the pleasure of positive moments that fade with circumstance, hedonic moment. And then they talk about eudaimonic moments, from the Greek eudaimonic, well-being, a sense of meaning and equanimity that really is more enduring. It has to do with having purpose in our lives, but it also, I sort of equate that with what we're calling contentment, because it tends to be more steady state. There's a deeper ground to what we psychologists call eudaimonic well-being, because it's more durable, and it doesn't require conditions to fit exactly what we're seeking, which is often the case with joy and happiness. And in fact, it really emerges when we stop fighting what it is. It's less a feeling to chase and more an orientation to cultivate. Think of it as a quiet okayness with life, just as it is. So it includes a tremendous amount of acceptance, a tremendous amount of equanimity. And so I hope that distinction between the two, whether we look at it from the Dharma or whether we look at it through the lens of psychology, is clear between these two different sort of experiences. But that all said, I want to talk about the paradox of pursuing happiness today. Because I think it's a particular peculiar trap that is woven into the fabric of modern life. It is so pervasive that most of us fall into it daily without even knowing we've done so. And that paradox is the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of happiness. This observable phenomenon, which we can see in ourselves, that the very act of chasing happiness often produces its opposite. The very act of chasing it often produces its opposite. The metaphor I like here that I ran across is, we grasp at joy the way a child tries to catch a butterfly. In our frantic reaching, we risk crushing the delicate thing or frightening it away. Okay. And this is just not some philosophical curiosity, esoteric notion. It's a practical problem that is present in our day-to-day life. It's present in our relationships, and it's about our sense of whether life is going well in the moment or going poorly. Now, from a practical Dharma perspective, it's not surprising, right? I mean, in fact, it's one of the most fundamental observations about the human mind. The teaching on dukkha, which translates as suffering, as you know, is more accurately understood as dissatisfaction, or a pervasive sense of unsatisfactoriness. And that points directly at what I'm talking about. We do not suffer primarily because of external circumstances. but because of the way our minds relate to that external circumstance, to experience. And nothing, to my mind, illustrates this more clearly than what happens when we make happiness itself a goal to be achieved. So I want to walk through sort of the psychological steps of how this gets us into trouble, how we end up creating unhappiness by trying to pursue happiness. First, we because we always begin by saying we're not currently happy. Okay, right now I'm unhappy. At least not happy enough. Okay, so we start with that. That's usually the premise on which this thing begins to build. And and right away you can see the gap there between where I am and where I want to be. Okay, I'm saying I'm not happy. I want to be happy. And that gap itself is a source of suffering. That gap itself is a source of discomfort. Because we have, in this very first moment of this pursuit, generated a feeling of lack. Something is missing. So now next we begin scanning our experience for evidence of happiness or its absence. And we ask questions like, am I happy yet? Is this making me happy? Is this thing bringing me happiness? Should I be happier than I am? We start going through this whole litany of inquiry. Remembering here the role, uh, the role of craving, okay, in our suffering. This constant monitoring pulls us out of direct engagement with the moment, with our lives, and into this sort of meta level of evaluation. We're looking down saying, am I happy? I'm not just experiencing what I'm experiencing. I'm meta evaluating, if you will, my experience. So that takes me out of this direct engagement with what's going on. I'm no longer simply living in the moment. I'm auditing and critiquing my living, my moment right now. That's the meta level, okay? And I would draw an analogy here to the experience of trying to fall asleep by monitoring whether or not I'm falling asleep. This is a huge source for many insomniacs in terms of how counterproductive this kind of self-surveillance can be. I'm trying to go to sleep, and I'm sitting there thinking, lying there thinking, am I sleepy yet? Am I going to sleep? When am I going to go to sleep? You can just see how it interferes with the letting go, the relaxing that sleep onset requires. So there's the first problem with pursuing happiness. We set it up as a goal. We seek that goal, and the very seeking of the goal undermines the experience because it takes us out of the moment. And then there's the problem of comparison. That's next. This wonderful quote from attributed to Teddy Roosevelt, where he said, "Comparison is the thief of joy." It's one of my favorite quotes. The pursuit of happiness almost inevitably involves some image of what happiness should look like. So I'm sitting here feeling unhappy. I'm comparing it to what I have this idealized model of how I should be feeling if I'm truly happy. And where does this come from? It comes from watching others that seem just filled with joy. It comes from social media. It comes from advertisers. It becomes from our own memories of when we had these really peak experiences. We can compare it to pretty much anything. We hold our present experience against these images, against these memories, against these comparisons, and find it wanting. Any Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon of ordinary life cannot compete with the curated highlight reel of idealized happiness. We have this model in our head, this curated highlight reel that we just simply can't compete with. So the comparison is the second barrier here to pursuing happiness in this sort of intentional way. And then finally, there's our good old friend impermanence. Even when we do achieve moments that match our conception of happiness, they pass. The vacation ends. Some of you may recall, if you read my first book, I talk about sitting watching the beautiful sunsets in Jamaica, but I'm so focused on it ending, so focused on its impermanence that I'm not present with the beauty of it in the moment. And that was a huge realization for me some years ago when I realized how I was always taking myself out of the joy of the moment by worrying about it being over. You know, go to the party, you're having a great time, but all you're thinking about, oh, it's going to end in an hour, and then all my friends are going to go home. So even when we achieve moments that match our model of happiness, they pass. The vacation ends, as I said. The sunset ends. The initial thrill of a new relationship becomes routine. The novelty wears off. The accomplishment that's felt so meaningful and brought me so much joy last month is yesterday's news. You know, the new phone, which I was so excited about, it's just a phone now a week later. If happiness becomes our goal, then the inevitable fading feels like a loss, feels like a failure, rather than just the natural rhythm of things that we know occur from impermanence. Okay. It's a letdown because we think it shouldn't happen. Now, in no way am I suggesting that when we walk this path of practical Dharma that we stop wanting a good life. Of course not. You know, I'm not asking that we become indifferent to pleasure or joy or to resign ourselves to misery. Absolutely not. But what we're talking about here is a fundamentally different relationship with our experience, and one that I would suggest sidesteps this paradox entirely. And we begin, as we often do, with the cultivation of present moment awareness. When I am fully engaged with what is happening right now, I'm usually able to experience what's coming up right now. It's the texture of a really meaningful conversation, that warmth of a cup of tea, that meaningfully relating to a person we're talking to, the sensation when I'm out walking, just the experience of putting one foot in front of the other and enjoying the surrounding environment, or watching my dog. You know, I'm not in that gap between where I am and where I should be. I am where I am, hard stop, not worried about where I should be. I am simply here. And the beauty of this is that here turns out to be far richer and more satisfying, I would argue, than when we notice, than when we're busy looking elsewhere. Okay. And this is not some mystical, esoteric claim. It is very practical. We can see it every day, opportunities every day. You know, if you just sit for 5 minutes later today and just attend to your breathing, nothing, notice what happens. No expectations. Yes, the mind wanders into plans and worries and grocery lists and fantasies, but it's all a form of pursuing something other than what is in that moment, which is watching the breath. This is why our meditation practice is so important to train our minds to stay present. Each time we notice something other than right now, we return to the breath. It really is a radical act. You know, my friend Pat Coffey talks about it as a moment of awakening, because we are choosing, when we come back to the breath, presence over pursuit. And over time, this simple practice reveals that much of our unhappiness is not a function of the circumstances around us. It's a function of the mental habit of being somewhere other than where we are in that moment, ahead of myself, behind myself, beside myself. The second teaching, which I mentioned earlier, is the recognition of craving, of tanha, as a mechanism, a simple mechanism, not a moral failing, not a weakness, not a defect. It's just what we do. But when we pursue happiness, when we're out seeking it, we are usually in the grip of that craving. I need to be happier. I need to find something that makes me happier. Why am I not happy? The mind's habitual reaching toward pleasant experience and its habitual pushing away of unpleasant experience instead of being right now. Practical Dharma invites us to observe this craving with simple curiosity rather than acting on it automatically. That's where we notice, that's where we pause. Oh, I'm craving greater happiness now. I'm craving things to be different now. That's interesting. I'm just going to leave it be. When we notice this thought, I need to be happier, I need this, I need that, we can pause and ask, what is actually happening right now? What does this craving feel like in my body? It's always useful to go to the body because you'll feel it. You'll feel some contraction, you'll feel some tightness, you'll feel some yearning, just generalized yearning. What am I believing in this moment? Not with the intention of the investigation suppressing desire, but illuminating it, bring it out in the open, look it square in the face, and then just let it go. Because in that illumination of investigating this craving, this desire, something shifts. You can observe it clearly. We begin to see that craving promises satisfaction but delivers restlessness. Here's the takeaway for today. Craving promises satisfaction, but it delivers restlessness. We can feel that itch, that gotta have it, gotta have it. And so in this examination, in this curious undertaking, we discover that ease comes not from getting what we want, but from releasing the tight grip of wanting itself. Not from getting what we want. That's not the source of ease, but from releasing the tight grip of the wanting itself, the clinging, the craving. This, again, is not passive resignation. It's a willingness to be with the experience as it exactly is, without rushing in to change it, without rushing in to fix it, without rushing in to hold on to it, or if it's unpleasant, push it away. And how many times a day do we do this? If we notice and pay attention, we do it a lot. We do it with difficult emotions. We do it with boredom. We do it with the ordinary moments that make up most of our lives. Oh, this is kind of, I'm just kind of, yeah, let me find something exciting to kind of pump me up. But paradoxically, when we stop demanding that each moment deliver happiness, many moments become more quietly satisfying on their own terms. I mean, that to me has been such a revelation when I've been able to sort of go there. That when I stop demanding that this moment bring happiness and just pause and feel the quiet satisfaction that comes from just being present, the pressure lifts, that inner restlessness abates, the craving quiets, life becomes more breathable. Okay. Now, the alternative to pursuing happiness is not pursuing unhappiness, please. It's shifting from this goal-oriented relationship with our emotional life, gotta be this, to a process-oriented one. So instead of asking, am I happy now? We might ask, am I present now? Am I right here? Am I engaged right now with this moment, with whatever I'm doing? Am I relating to this moment with openness, with curiosity rather than resistance? And this shift, just that shift, has practical consequences because it means we can find meaning even in difficult moments rather than simply enduring them as obstacles to our happiness. Remember, the Buddha said, welcome all experience, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. It's just all part of the fabric of our lives. We don't need to hold on to the good stuff and squeeze it to death, and we don't need to push away the unpleasant. It means we can appreciate the ordinary pleasures, the little subtle beauty of life without the anxiety of worrying if they constitute real happiness, whatever that is. It means we can let go of this exhausting performance of happiness that social expectations all around us demand. It's, as you often hear me say, it's always amazing to me that modern psychology keeps rediscovering what the Buddha taught 2,600 years ago. And research in the field has increasingly confirmed that what contemplative traditions have taught for millennia, that well-being, true well-being, not fleeting happiness, is more closely associated with meaning, finding meaning in our lives, engagement, and acceptance, rather than some direct pursuit of positive emotional states. People get high to try to get those states. They drink, they drug, they look at porn, they do all kinds of things to try to generate positive emotional states. It's a fool's errand. It will always burn out and crash. And I would suggest to you that the people that report in studies and surveys the deepest satisfaction with life are not those who make happiness some explicit goal. They don't talk about that. They are those who become absorbed in something larger than the ever-changing emotional weather system inside themselves. In work, in love, in creative expression, in service. It's yeah. I would, for example, the joy I get just with being with this Sangha twice a week. It's just a huge part of my week, important part of my week. I look forward to it. Or the time I spend every morning, I write for a couple hours when I get up early every morning. I'm right locked into it. It brings me tremendous joy. Or just the time I spend out walking my dogs, or connecting meaningfully with others, sitting across from someone and really connecting meaningfully. I have found over the years of this practice that those are the things that really matter, that give meaning to my life. Not new toys, not new phones, not chasing this or chasing that. I still do that. I get caught in that. We all do. But I'm better at seeing that that's really not the end goal. The paradox of pursuing happiness is not some cosmic bait and switch. It is an invitation to examine our assumptions about what a good life, a life well lived, looks like, and how we might actually achieve it. Stop buying the cultural message that things, stuff, accomplishments, honors, awards, money are going to do it for us. They are fleeting. They will never bring enduring contentment. And this path offers a clear-eyed, practical response that asks us to stop chasing the butterfly, to sit still, to breathe, to pay attention, and just let life come to us in all its messy, ordinary, impermanent, unsatisfying at times, and quietly miraculous fullness. I mean, that is to me such a powerful message. Happiness, as it turns out, is not something we find at the end of a search. It is what remains when we stop searching. It is what remains when we stop searching. So, those are some thoughts this morning on the pursuit of happiness.